As he walked down the staircase, Cyan could feel that this place was different from the previous time he was here. The place where he was at was an ancient temple that served the god of light, Lumendel. Until all of the history on this land was erased, because of the god-demon war that happened 300 years ago. No one could have imagined that such a place would exist in the mountains just behind the duchy castle. Cyan could see it now, the glowing bright sword floating in the middle of the air. This was the owner of the temple. 999 before Foundation August 12, humanity had finally succeeded in driving out the Demon King's army from Velius. The Demon King's army was far stronger than the humans. But the humans found ancient relics called the gods' weaponry, allowing them to take the win. One of those relics, called Durand Arc, was a holy sword blessed by the god of light, Lumendel. This sword was deemed the main cause of humanity's victory against the demons. But sadly, it was also the reason why Cyan had met a pitiful death in the future, due to the sword being possessed by Cyan Vert. Looking at it now, Cyan wonders if the sword had something to do with his current regression. But as he noticed it, he could sense that nothing was happening, which he expected. So he decides to kick the piece of metal instead. Feeling that his mood had been ruined, he decided to just take care of business and leave. It was said that once you walk past the light, there's a shadow that feels rather otherworldly. Another sword was laying on the ground on top of a circle, covered in a reddish-black aura. At first glance, people might think that it was the sword's shadow, but Cyan knew that it was impossible as it wasn't a shadow in the first place. Where there is light, there must be darkness too. Pressing onto the circle, it triggered something that revealed a pathway that leads to another room, hidden by the altar of light. Cyan had entered another room and peeked behind a door. He could see a familiar sight as another weapon was floating in the air. But this time, it was covered in that same aura that he had. Holding onto its handle without hesitation, Cyan greets his old friend, the demonic sword called Carum. As he held it within his hand, the sword started to glow and radiate even more of its aura. Looking at how beautiful it looks in his hand, Cyan greets it good morning. But as he swung it around a couple of times, he couldn't see any other effect, making him wonder if it wasn't awake yet. But he was still pretty happy with Carum. Its familiar feeling was the best to Cyan as it made him feel like slaying something now. But as he was loving the sword, a voice and figure appeared in the shadow, asking Cyan if he had any fear, warning him that there was an effect for awakening it. Cyan, with his normal-looking face, simply replies to the voice that the sword was now his. But the shadowy figure grew much larger in size, revealing to Cyan had woken up a sleeping demonic sword. With a creepy smile on its face, it warns Cyan that it was too late to regret it now. It launches itself to our boy, aiming to take control of his body. Much to its surprise, Cyan simply grabs the shadowy figure by its throat. As he holds the throat tightly in his hand, he tells the figure, who reveals its face, that it wasn't this rash before. The figure was confused on how it was possible for him to touch it, but our boy was serious when he said that the sword was now his. The shadowy figure suddenly summoned sharp pink-clawed hands, hoping to strike Cyan, and was able to back off. It turns out to be a woman. The mysterious woman, who manages to slip out from Cyan's hold, asked him about who he was. Looking at the red-black aura that Cyan was releasing, the woman wonders if he was the successor, as she could feel Eru's aura from him. Hearing that, Cyan reveals that he was in fact the successor of Eru. He declares himself as her master, and orders her to bow down, before revealing that this woman was the demonic sword Carum. But she refuses. After all, she sees that Cyan was just a small kid. So she attacks him relentlessly, unwilling to accept the fact that he was the successor. As he blocks her attacks, Cyan realizes that words aren't going to work on Carum, as her final goal was to take over the body of the user. So now, he had no choice. He needed to go a bit easy on her. With a smile on his face, Cyan activates the demonic sword control, causing Carum to instantly be pressed hard onto the ground. As she laid on the ground, Cyan offered her a chance to accept him as her master while he was being nice. But Carum ain't no bitch. She struggles against his power, wondering how he was able to use that skill. Seeing her refusal, Cyan calls the spell again. This time, Carum's head went straight into the ground. Seeing that she was still refusing, Cyan spams the spell, demonic sword control, over and over again. To the point that Carum's body was halfway into the ground. Cyan then asked her the same question. Finally, Carum gives in and accepts him as the master. After finally gaining full control over the demonic sword Carum, Cyan aims to leave this place, thinking that he had been gone for too long. Carum was excited to leave as well, as it had been a long time since she breathed fresh air. Revealing a new form, she was happy over the smell of fresh air. She then nudges Cyan to reveal his full name to her, which he does. Cyan Vert. Hearing his name for the first time, Carum noted that she had never heard of such a name before, making her wonder if Eru had really chosen him. This was when Cyan revealed to her that Eru had chosen him in his past life. Hearing this, Carum wonders what the hell he was talking about. Cyan continues to tell her that he had already died once. But soon, they came back to the Holy Light Sword. Carum could see that Duran was still sleeping. Cyan knew that he would have to wait for 20 more years for his owner. Hearing this from Cyan, Carum felt as though he knew the future. But as she was saying that, Cyan takes a swing at Duran, slicing off the tip of the handle. And took it. Seeing this, Carum was panicking, wondering what Cyan was going to do with the tip. With an evil look on his face, Cyan did it simply to make things more interesting in the future. After some time, we now turn to a scene where a carriage was driving along the dirt road. It came to a stop as its carriage doors opened. Stepping out of it was Cyan, who was now dressed in armor. Looking around where he was, he couldn't believe that the day had finally arrived, proving that time sure flies. As a group of knights arrive, Cyan bows his head to greet his father the Duke, who wanted to ask Cyan one last time if he was sure that he wanted to go to the battlefront, as he would allow it if he decided to back off now. But our boy was going all in, telling his father that his heart lies at the battlefront. Hearing his reply, the Duke turns to Yulin, ordering him to open something. Cyan was quick to notice that Yulin was holding a scroll, which meant that they were planning on summoning something. As Yulin opens the scroll, it reveals a red magic circle. It turns out that they were summoning a demonic beast near them. Cyan was now up against a hellhound face to face now. Instead of being afraid, he was calm. Raising his rapier against the low-ranked demonic beast from the Lamia Valley, he knew that this was a test that the knights and his father had a hard time preparing. Before the test started, Cyan noticed that the knights nearby had their hands on their sword handles already, meaning that they were ready to come in if things got dangerous for him. The Duke provided some words of wisdom, telling Cyan to be responsible for his every action and that he needed to prove how strong his resolve is by passing this trial and showing all of them. Hearing about this trial, Yulin was reminded of something in the past. He was given a proposal from Cyan, who had asked for a duel against him. Cyan explains that there was only 3 days left until the deadline he had promised his father, so he couldn't just keep swinging his sword in the air now. Cyan wanted to get a sense of a real fight, so he wanted Yulin to help him out. But Yulin was hesitating to accept the request, since his opponent was going to be someone who is so young, and suggested Kranz as his opponent instead. But then Cyan reveals that Kranz would run away from him every time they saw each other nowadays. Yulin could see that this was going to be a hassle, but still, he decided to accept Cyan's request for a match. But he gives the condition that he was only going to fight with his sword's sheath, and that he was going to focus on defense while Cyan could attack all he wants. Cyan accepts Yulin's conditions, but before they started, he had another favor to ask of him. With a serious look in his eyes this time, Cyan tells Yulin to not reveal whatever happens from now on to his father. And that this was an order. Hearing that, Yulin couldn't help but be curious by what Cyan means. And so, the match started with Cyan's fast charge towards Yulin, who managed to block the first strike. But as he defended against the attack, he could feel how heavy it was, which was hard to believe since his opponent was a 10-year-old boy. Seeing how fast Cyan was moving, he could see how quick he was. But then Cyan disappears from his sight completely, and reappeared high up above in the air above him. Sensing the impending attack, Yulin manages to block all of Cyan's attacks so far. With a mad look in his eyes, Cyan lands the final blow, which Yulin still manages to block. As he landed on his feet, Cyan mentions to him that it was expected that he couldn't win against him, and decided that this was the end of their match, thanking Yulin for a good job. Yulin on the other hand was out of breath, stuttering in his words as he told Cyan that he had done a great job, but in his mind, he couldn't believe that the once weak young master had now grown up so much. As we return to the present, Yulin was immersed in his thoughts, thinking about his hunch from back then being right. Then it would mean that Cyan could now overcome any trial that comes at him. The trial had begun as the hellhound made the first move. Cyan could see it coming now. As the hellhound screams while charging at him, our boy was quick with the blade, cutting its eye first. With that successful first cut, the hellhound misses its attack against Cyan and flies somewhere else instead. Seeing the outcome of his attack, Cyan knew that with his current strength, fighting a monster was still too much for him, so he needed to end this battle as quickly as possible. Seeing that the hellhound had recovered, Cyan intended to end the battle with this final attack. With a quick movement of his arm, he manages to slice the neck of the side where he had cut its eye previously, landing various blows around the hellhound and finally piercing its head with his rapier as he flew above it. The way he ended the fight amazed everyone in the camp, as the knights all stared in disbelief and shock. But one man was different. The Duke was smiling. Looking at the amount of blood spilled by the hellhound, Cyan could only see it as a waste, as it was enough to fill a few bottles. But he knew that if he collected and drank the blood here, they would all think he was crazy. As he took back his rapier from the dead hellhound, his father appeared behind him, clapping and calling what he did impressive. Being impressed, the Duke finally accepts Cyan and tells him that he would be seeing him at the battlefront. As Cyan thanks his father for accepting his request, Cayman's shadow started to appear on his shadow as she called out to him. She was pissed off, asking him if he thought of her as a kitchen knife. But he replies that he knows her as a demonic sword, which made Cayman wonder why he wouldn't use her, as she needed blood to gain strength. She looked over the dead hellhound, begging Cyan to give her a chance to have a gulp of its blood. But he refuses her request this time and summons her back in the sword, assuring her that he was going to use her to her heart's content soon. Look forward to it.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.